Just think about this. Just think about what it feels like to not have a parent. Now, firstly, what is the job of a parent? Job of a parent, we say, firstly, is to be a parent. And then once you are a parent, your job is to steer, not control, but steer and guide the child that you brought into the earth in such a way where it brings, I'm going to say, make sure my mic is in here, make sure it brings a level of safe common sense, positive logic, and a continuation of freedom of choice. When I say freedom of choice, and be careful of this, because we're not allowing, or we don't wish our children to run wild from a place of inexperience. But a child is never born problematic. They become problematic from the digestion or from digesting the emotional surroundings they live in emotionally. So it's like an emotional digestion. So you're eating your emotional surroundings as a child, and then you digest that out emotionally back out in a practical way from the level of experience you have as a child at that time in your life. So what that means is that in theory, as a child, you were playing out the exact mirrored emotion that you're experiencing from the people we call mom and dad, who are husband and wife. But you can't express that emotion back out in the same way, the way they do, because they have a different, let's say, motor skill way of presenting life, or presenting that emotion into life, where that child does not have that experience. So it'll come out in a very childlike way. But if you strip away the actions and look at the emotion of what that child is presenting, it will be an exact mirror of what's been presented at home. And some of those emotions that are being presented at home from the person we call mom and dad, who effectively is just the husband and wife of the house, are emotions that are fairly hidden. And when I say that, they disguised emotions. You can't disguise an emotion from a child. They see the rawity. They see it for what it is, not for what it is you're trying to pretend it to be as a parent. So we go through those experiences as a child, but what if we don't go through those experiences? What if we don't have that around us? We don't have the dad or the mom. Is it a loss? Is it a gain? If we don't have our parents around us, we could say that in the early days, children are very resilient, or are they? We say that. But when you become an adult yourself and you didn't experience that adult in your life, then what are you presenting out? As an adult, there was a child in life without an adult. I guess that's like being a professional in something but not having the training of being that professional. That's just like being, a musician and coaching someone to be a musician but never being it yourself, or know nothing about it, but just seeing it around you. And that's the difference. Now, when we don't have that in our life, we don't have the parent in our life, we subsidize. A child, like a lost lamb, will always look for someone to look after it, and that's what a child does. It'll go to it'll warm to the next adult human being that presents to that child a level of gratitude, self-worth, love, and the things that a child craves. Because we do crave love as children. We do crave the love to be wanted, even though we're born with, a fullness of worth. So what happens to that child? That child first of all, in the very early days, at the ages of 1 to 10 maybe, will gravitate to a person that demonstrates love, and then that person becomes the substitute of what would have been the biological parent. Then they get into the teens. It gets a bit complex there. We could say some children that didn't experience any adult, they have to grab a level of maturity, grab a level of maturity very early in life, but that also means that they've not learned that maturity. So it's a shape of maturity, a shape of self-parenting. Often we can see that go into a place of what we call the wild child, if we want, a place where that child becomes, for other adults, off the rails. But that child is just demonstrating, mirroring out nothing more than the emotional experiences, or the abandonment, the loneliness, and all these things of those emotional experiences, that they are not in a mature place to manage, if that makes sense. Let me just bear with you, because I'm a little bit distracted from the amount of people that are walking around the campsite here today, and I need to keep my line of eye here, because sometimes I talk, but I'm also nosing at the same time. It's like, come on, Paul, be focused. So the child is in his teens. I say his. Let's aim it at the male this time, and maybe do the female in the next talk, because girls and boys manage emotions very differently, and that's natural. A female is designed to is naturally has a different endurance, a greater endurance, because they carry children, and that takes stamina compared to a man who doesn't, obviously. You hear the phrase "mom's boy." Boys are generally weaker emotionally. So even though they may seem stronger by their boyish, bullyish outplay from not having a parent around, effectively they are weaker emotionally. So it means that they then resolve into, and many do, into a kind of a wildish approach to life. Depend on the country you live, deep into alcohol, maybe drugs. I mean, who knows? Or it can go the opposite. But I think that you don't really recycle the loneliness of not having a parent until later in life. And that kind of comes maybe 40s, sometimes as late as your 50s in life, years of age. But in the early part, I think that it plays out in a way where the child will not own up to the loneliness, will effectively become resentful to the parent and to the memory of the parent, or the knowing of the parent, and wish to have no knowing or no knowledge, or wish to have nothing to do with our parent. That's generally what happens in the early part there. And that's a way of emotionally protecting themselves, but also a way of looking like there's no vulnerability also. Because as teenagers, we need to be the strong ones. We're in that process. And it's a fight or flight kind of thing. Yeah. So when we think about it, is there a loss for not having a parent around? Yes, I'm going to say there is. A loss in experience in life for that child. Will that child survive? Absolutely. Will that child be a better child or a worse child for not having a parent around? I'm going to say that, it's such a broad thought that we could say yes, and we could say no. it really depends on how the child, once that young man reaches his 40s, late 30s, 40s, into his 50s, how he recycles that experience from the past, and whether he turns that into a place of, positivity, or it remains a place of resentment. And that turns into a cancerous thought then, being that, when you resent life, you get resent. It can be where you've got a child is through its late teens, 20s, was a real handful, but then is incredibly humbling later in life. And people learn a lot from that child's experience. And I've met many people that have had that neglect from parenting early in life, then turned it around. So it really depends. But I'm going to say that it's definitely a subject that we need to know more about, because we just, for a lot of the time, assume our children are resilient and have this bounce back ability in life, when it looks like they do, when in fact later in life, I guess that's why therapists are generally overbooked. Yeah, just a thought.